After years of living on the streets, I discovered that my godmother had left her entire estate to me. But the moment my parents, the same people who abandoned me at 16, found out, they rushed to the lawyer's office, claiming it was theirs by right. Their confidence vanished, though, the moment a video of my godmother's final will began to play, because she had one last, devastating truth to reveal. This is the story of a 20-year-old lie and a truth that refused to remain buried. But before we open that will, tell me, what city are you watching from today? And don't forget to subscribe for more stories shared daily. Let's return to where it all began. For the past 7 years, survival had been my only skill. I learned which park benches were safest, which soup kitchens served the warmest meals, and how to disappear in plain sight, a ghost wandering a city that had no space for me. That life began on my 16th birthday. That night, my parents, Richard and Susan, packed my things into 2 black trash bags, drove me to the edge of town, and left me with $100 and my father's cold final words: "You're a disappointment. You're no longer our problem." Their excuse to everyone else was that I was rebellious and impossible to control. But the truth was simpler and crueler. They were social climbers obsessed with perfection. I was quiet, artistic, awkward, a poet, not the cheerleader or debutante they wanted. So they erased me. In the years that followed, only one person refused to let me vanish completely: my godmother, Miss Evelyn Reed. She was wealthy and respected, a friend from the world my parents desperately wanted to join. But more importantly, she was kind in ways few ever knew. She found me during those first terrifying weeks on the streets and became my only lifeline. Her own health was failing, a fragile heart condition that kept her confined to her mansion, and my parents had cruelly forbidden her from helping me. My mother had warned her, pretending concern but delivering a threat: "If you take her in, we'll cut all contact. You'll never see us or your goddaughter again. She's a bad influence." So our bond became a secret. Once a month, she'd send her driver to bring me to a quiet cafe or hidden museum corner. She'd make sure I'd eaten, then slip me $100, money she could barely spare from the allowance my parents controlled. She was my single connection to warmth and kindness, a fragile thread of decency holding my world together. When she died, I found out through a short obituary in the newspaper. Standing in a public library, reading that notice, I felt the last bit of light in my life fade. I didn't attend the funeral. I knew my parents would be there, playing the role of grieving friends. I wouldn't have been welcome. So I mourned alone, in the quiet shelter that had become my only home. A week later, something impossible happened. A sharply dressed man appeared at the shelter, a lawyer named Mr. Chen. He handed me a crisp white envelope, an invitation to the reading of Miss Evelyn Reed's will. I, Aurora, the girl my parents had thrown away, was named as a primary beneficiary. I was sure it was a mistake, or worse, a cruel trick by my parents. Still, out of loyalty to my godmother, I went. I arrived at the Grand Law Office in my cleanest clothes, jeans and a thrifted sweater, and found my parents already seated in plush leather chairs. When they saw me, their faces shifted from shock to rage. They saw my presence not as Evelyn's wish, but as a threat to what they believed was theirs. My father spoke first, his tone low and sharp. "What is she doing here?" he demanded. "This is a private family matter." Mr. Chen remained calm. "My client was very clear, Mr. Davis. Miss Aurora was to be present." Then he began reading. The will was simple: a few donations to charities, and then the stunning final clause: the entirety of my remaining estate, including my home, investments, and all liquid assets, totaling over $10 million. I leave to my beloved goddaughter, Aurora. The room erupted. "This is outrageous," my mother cried, her voice high and indignant. "We cared for Evelyn in her final years. We managed her affairs. We were there for her. And this girl," she finally looked at me, eyes full of venom, "has been a homeless vagrant for years. What claim could she possibly have?" I stayed silent, hands clasped in front of me. Their words no longer hurt. I had endured cold nights, hunger, and the deep loneliness of being a forgotten child, all because of their pride and greed. I had survived, and that survival gave me a strength they couldn't comprehend. They thought this was about money. They had no idea it was about justice. "If you're quite finished," Mr. Chen said firmly, "we'll proceed with the rest of Miss Reed's will." He motioned for us to sit. My parents sank into their leather chairs. I took a small, hard seat by the wall, the place I had long grown used to. "Very well," my father said arrogantly. "Let's get this over with. My wife and I have a lunch reservation." Mr. Chen gave a faint smile. He picked up a remote and pointed it at a large screen mounted on the wall. "Miss Reed chose to deliver her final message in a more personal format," he said. He pressed play. The screen flickered to life, and there she was, my godmother, Evelyn Reed, sitting in her favorite armchair, a soft blanket over her legs. Her eyes, bright and clear, looked straight into the camera, full of warmth, truth, and a quiet final purpose. My parents shifted uneasily in their seats, clearly unprepared for what was coming. They had expected a routine, impersonal reading of a legal document, not a final, personal message from the woman whose trust they had so deeply violated. "Hello, Richard. Hello, Susan." My godmother's voice filled the silent room. Her tone carried a blend of quiet sorrow and unshakable, measured anger. "If you're watching this, I'm gone. And you're here, no doubt expecting to be rewarded for your friendship." She then turned her eyes directly to the camera. It felt as if she were looking straight at me. "And hello, my dearest Aurora," she said, her voice softening with a depth of affection I could almost feel. "I'm so sorry I had to leave you, but I have one final gift for you, the gift of truth." I glanced at my parents. Their faces were draining of color. This was not the simple reading of a will they had imagined. It was a reckoning. "Richard, Susan," her voice continued, this time steeled with resolve. "Let's discuss the educational trust I set up for Aurora at birth. $100,000 for her college education." She looked down at papers in her lap. "And let's talk about these." On the screen next to her, documents appeared, bank statements, withdrawal slips, each signed by my father and mother. "I have here," she said, her tone steady and controlled, "the full financial records for that trust. These records show 10 years of systematic, shameful withdrawals, paying for your club membership, your luxury car, your vacations to Europe. You didn't simply fail your daughter. You stole from her. You stole her future to fund your own shallow lifestyle." "She's lying," my mother whispered, her voice breaking with panic. She was senile. She didn't know what she was saying. But the documents on screen, carrying their undeniable signatures, told a different story. "And then," my godmother continued, her voice now heavy with disappointment, "when she turned 16, when the money was gone and she began asking questions about the college fund that no longer existed, you did something even worse. You couldn't face the consequences of your greed, so you created a false crisis. You called her rebellious. You called her out of control, and you threw your own child, your kind, loving daughter, out onto the street. You cast her away to cover your crime." The truth, ugly and undeniable, was finally out. I looked at my parents. My father stared blankly at the screen, his face a mask of gray shame. My mother was crying, not from regret, but from the fear of being exposed. On the screen, my godmother took a slow, deliberate breath. Her expression softened again as she turned her gaze back to me. "And so," she said calmly, "my last will and testament is not just about distributing my assets. It is an act of justice, a long overdue rebalancing of the scales." My parents sat in ruins, their 20-year secret exposed with undeniable proof. But as I watched my godmother's face, I realized this wasn't about punishment alone. It was her final act of love for me, though I still didn't know how powerful that act would be. I sat on my hard chair against the wall, my grief a distant shadow, my entire focus fixed on her face, on the screen. She was smiling now, a look of love so deep it felt like a warm hand on my cold cheek. Behind me, I heard my parents' panicked, uneven breathing. They had been revealed and condemned, and the moment of consequence was arriving. "To my dear, brave, beloved goddaughter, Aurora," she said, her voice ringing clear in the silent conference room, "I leave the entirety of my estate, my home, my investments, the charitable foundation that bears my name. All of it is now yours." Her words were plain but earth-shaking. The sum was immense, beyond anything I could comprehend after years of surviving on scraps. "It is not a gift, my dear," she continued, as if sensing my disbelief. "It is a restoration. The future stolen from you, returned 100-fold. Use it well. Build a life of purpose and joy. It is all I've ever wanted for you." Then her expression hardened again, her voice turning cool and precise as she addressed my parents. "And as for my dear lifelong friends, Richard and Susan," she said with measured irony, "I've left you something as well, a final gift." She gestured to a sealed manila folder in her lap. In the conference room, Mr. Chen opened his briefcase and placed an identical folder folder on the polished table before my parents. "Inside this folder," she explained, "is the evidence of your actions, the bank statements, the withdrawal slips, and a sworn affidavit from my private investigator who's documented your activities for 5 years. It's a complete, prosecutable case file for felony embezzlement." My mother let out a small, strangled sob. "You have 2 options," Miss Reed said, her voice now calm but absolute. "Option 1, you will sign the full confession my lawyer has prepared. You will surrender any claim to my estate and any future claim to Aurora's assets. And here, today, you will give her the apology you've owed her for 7 years. If you do this, this evidence," she tapped the folder, "will remain sealed in my lawyer's vault forever." She paused, letting the gravity of her words fill the room. "Option 2, she continued, her tone now cold and unyielding, "is to refuse. You can cling to your pride and arrogance, but if you do, my lawyer, Mr. Chen, has my final, legally binding instruction. He will leave this room, drive straight to the district attorney's office, and deliver the full case file. You will be charged, prosecuted, and I assure you, convicted." The video ended, the screen fading to black. The silence that followed was deafening. Mr. Chen calmly opened the folder he had placed on the table earlier. From it, he drew out a multi-page, pre-written confession and set it in front of my parents, along with a sleek fountain pen. "You have 1 hour to decide," he said quietly. They didn't need an hour. The alliance of greed and deception that had once held them together collapsed instantly into bitter accusations. "This is your fault," my mother hissed, panic in her voice. "You wasted all the money on those failed investments." "My fault," my father snapped back, his face twisted with anger. "You're the one who demanded luxury cars, the club membership, the designer clothes." I didn't stay to watch their argument unravel further. I stood, walked to the table, and looked down at them, broken, weeping, and defeated. I felt no pity, no rage, only a quiet, distant sadness. "The worst part," I said evenly, "isn't the money you stole. It's the 7 years of my life you took away. The years I could have spent with her." I nodded toward the dark screen. "You didn't just steal my future. You stole my time with her. That's something I'll never forgive." Without another word, I turned and walked toward the door, leaving them to face the consequences of their choices. The fight was over. The truth was revealed. And for the first time in years, I felt completely free. I stepped out of that cold, sterile office into the bright, chaotic city afternoon. The weight of 7 years of homelessness, invisibility, and being forgotten lifted from my shoulders like dust in the wind. I had entered that building a beggar. I walked out an heiress. But more than that, I walked out with something far greater: justice. Later that day, the call from Mr. Chen came. His tone was calm but quietly satisfied. "Miss Aurora," he said, "your parents have made their decision. They signed the full confession. The evidence related to the embezzlement of your trust fund will now remain sealed. The estate in its entirety is officially yours." "Did they say anything?" I asked, still clinging to a faint, foolish hope for remorse. There was a brief pause before he replied, "They did not. They signed the papers and left." A few days later, a formal letter arrived at the homeless shelter where I was still staying. It was from them, but it wasn't heartfelt. It was cold, drafted by a lawyer, filled with phrases like regret for any perceived wrongdoing and desire for amicable resolution. It wasn't an apology. It was a surrender, and it was the last I ever heard from them. The weeks that followed felt unreal. Suddenly, I was navigating a world I had only observed from the outside meetings with bankers, investors, and estate managers. Men in suits who once would have ignored me on the streets now addressed me as ma'am and spoke with respect. But my first act of wealth wasn't buying luxury. It was honoring the woman who had given me a second chance. I took charge of her charitable foundation, the one she had mentioned in her will, and began learning everything about her. I read her journals, her letters, and her records of quiet, anonymous generosity. That's when I realized Miss Evelyn Reed hadn't just been kind. She had been a champion for the forgotten. A year later, I stood on a stage beneath the warm glow of lights, facing a crowd gathered to celebrate the opening of a new facility, a safe, modern shelter with warm beds, a library, a kitchen, and job training programs. Its name, Evelyn's House, the first of many I planned to build for homeless and at-risk youth. Looking out at the crowd, supporters, city officials, and the hopeful faces of the shelter's first residents, I thought about my parents and their last words to me. A homeless, worthless vagrant. They were half right. I was homeless, but I was never worthless. My worth wasn't tied to money or status. It was something resilient, forged in hardship and survival. My godmother had seen that strength in me. She didn't just leave me her fortune. She left me her faith. She believed that a cast-out girl could rise and help others find their way out of the dark. This is my legacy now, my purpose, to transform pain into promise, to remind every forgotten child that they are not invisible, not worthless, and never alone. And that kind of wealth is worth more than any amount of money. An extraordinary story of transformation and the lasting power of love and justice. What did you think of how Miss Reed delivered her final lesson through her will? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If Aurora's journey inspired you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more powerful stories, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.